Okay, let's talk about my final thoughts on Tanto Monta. To begin with, and you'll see this as a theme if you watched the playthrough, the intro, anything. I think this is way too heavy a design for, like, there's way too much chrome and way too much material to keep in head for the fundamental design choice of what the game was going to be, right? The Here I Stand structure, to me, first of all, it's a CDG, which means there's already a certain burden of play. You know, you've got to assess all the cards and make these decisions pulse by pulse, etc. Which, honestly, for me, Here I Stand is about as heavy as I can get on that kind of play with a big multiplayer CDG type style. Given that, I did try to play it a little differently than I played Here I Stand or Virgin Queen. Virgin Queen went over the limit for me as well, and tried to take more of the attitude that I took with Europa Universalis. And what I found was, okay, first of all, it's way too burdensome, even given that. Trying to remember all the intricate little special rules that this game contains, which is, you know, smaller than the amount that are in an EU, but delivered with the extra weight of play that a CDG kind of engages you in. It was just too much for me. Much in the same way that I would say EU Pop was too much for me in that sort of way. I felt like I was being buffeted, that I couldn't really get a grasp on the narrative because I'm spending too much time trying to figure out what the game state is and what the consequences, you know, of my move are and all that. The game has to be a lot simpler for me to be able to approach it reasonably well. That said, I had more fun than I remember having with Virgin Queen in a lot of ways. I don't know if I just approached Virgin Queen incorrectly, or if this one's greater focus on military achievements, sort of, which I'm not positive is actually the case, but it feels like there's a greater focus on the military achievements, drove me more to understanding some of the narrative that was going on, even if very little happened militarily because of the constraints, you know, of the card size, etc., the hand size and whatever, you know. Each turn didn't really generate as much activity as I feel I expected, but it's at such an abstract level that you can kind of pass some of that off. But more than that, the game ended in a situation where it has the same highly competitive kind of structure that Here I Stand had, where, you know, you're busily trying to prevent other players from winning an automatic victory, maybe going for one on your own, but also trying to pad your position for the late game and trying to make all these kinds of decisions within that. That just does not comport with the kind of play that I use in EU, right? Now, I do gripe about the coin games for always going to the last turn, which in and of itself doesn't bother me, but always actually coming down to the very last card play, which is to say that the last card that could possibly be played in any game, in any coin game, seems to determine who wins the game. It's possible somebody's knocked out far enough that they're not really in the running, but it often comes down to between 2 or 3 players, sometimes all 4, who gets the first go or who gets the key move on that very last card. And that's very strange, right? I find that, especially in the coin games that are sort of the older ones, that I feel are most true to the design. And I always kind of reflect to, that never really bothered me with Here I Stand, because it doesn't come down to the last card play. It does come down to the last turn. It does come down to a tight play usually, unless, only one person understands the game or something like that. But yeah, players are usually trying very hard to prevent somebody from grabbing a win. In this one, it felt like there was way too much burden to understand that there was a threat that somebody would win. I felt like I was keeping people within the range. Some of it was also that the victory points, there's so many victory point both on the board and on your player card, just so much of that information that I didn't do a lot of recounts. I didn't do a lot of thinking about that. So that also added to the surprise factor, which is to say all my victory point counts were wrong when I got towards the end of the game and recounted, and I'm like, wow, everybody was a little bit off. But even discounting that, I think that it would have surprised me. Now that may actually not be just the overload of the game. It feels like that's what covered up, the situation. But there's also a lot of randomness in this game. It has a huge deck of cards and capacity to do weird things with the cards that can generate you more moves and stuff to a larger extent than I remember in Here I Stand. Again, Virgin Queen, I played it once, maybe twice, I don't remember. I may have given it a second shot. And it really disappointed me. I couldn't find the narrative, etc. I am very tempted to play it again after having played this with more of an EU mindset, because I got more fun out of this, even if I don't feel like it matches, like that the amount of chrome and the amount of stuff in terms of game state and everything that you have to keep track of matches the kind of competitive play that I feel like the Here I Stand system kind of promotes, right? So yeah, as a broad view, that's what I'm gonna say about it. Let me take a look at components, then I'll pick apart if there are any little bugaboos I have with the rules, etc. I don't want to reload my pipe, so. Well, let's start with the most important thing, the dice. They're still too big, and there aren't enough of them. I found myself having to pull out, 15 dice per side, basically, for a combat. So I had to have like 30 dice, 15 white, 15 red, to be able to handle combats. For the rest of the game, they'd be fine. I like my dice smaller anyway, and I would have much, much rather a lot of smaller, high-impact rounded dice, just because I favor those. But that's just a matter of personal taste. They're real pretty. I just really wish I could shrink GMT dice down to about the size of the Avalon Hill dice, but keep all the other features about them. And then they'd go in my best six-siders set. Cards. So I complained that these are the armored cards. They're not quite. First of all, I didn't notice any damage to them, which is one good thing. They're stiffer than I like to shuffle. I've got arthritis. But I think at any point in my life, like I'm remembering, when Magic cards were too stiff. They came out with some versions of them that were just too stiff. And they felt more fragile and, were harder to shuffle large decks, etc. I found myself not really able to shuffle these as comfortably. I prefer, again, much more of a poker-style card that, you can riffle very, very easily and do really large decks of cards. That's the physicality of them. Beyond that, there's a lot of text on just about every card. Well, I don't know. On many of the cards. A lot of text, a lot of information, which means, and some of them, maybe many of them, have multiple options of how you can use the card for an event, as well as, hey, you could instead use it for points, which puts this decision overload in play. You give me too many choices, each turn, each card play takes a lot more mental effort and a lot more working through and understanding all the permutations and everything in a way that, again, adds to the burden. There's already a lot there, burden-wise. I don't have much to complain about the map. It's a bubble map. There are some places, there are some connections where, like, I thought there was a connection and there wasn't, and it caused me to cheat. I think in particular, I'm trying to find the one in particular. It's not a small map. I think in particular this line here between Narbonne and Marseille has to go up through Avignon. Which doesn't even make sense, right? We got ports on both of these. These are coastal areas. They should be connected, but there's another one here where they're not. You have to go through Avignon. At least there's mountains in the way there to argue it. I guess there's a river in the way here. You can make your arguments for why the map was chosen the way it is. But anyway, there are some connections that I feel should be there that aren't. The rest of the world map can get very, very cluttered with exploration markers if there's other stuff going on and everything. Depends on, you don't expect the Turks and French to really be exploring too much, and the Spaniards and Portuguese should be moving in different directions. But the area along the west coast of Africa is particularly likely for people to be exploring. And that got a little crowded. I found some places where, for example, between sea zones, I didn't see things as well as I thought I should be able to. But overall, I think the map works pretty well. For the type. Not a big fan of bubble maps looks-wise, but it worked. The counters. Yes. Okay, so the counters, perfectly fine quality-wise, but in terms of being able to discern things between them, there were some definite problems there. The North Africans, and I guess what are the Ottomans, are, look like they're the same nation, color-wise. Don't have any kind of indication. The Ottomans aren't even really a player in the game. Feels like their pieces should say Ottoman on the bottom of them, because most of the minor power, all of the minor powers except for that, have such an indication on them. On top of that, I found the Portuguese and the Aragonese. The Aragonese are kind of this reddish color. The Portuguese are kind of this pinkish color. Looked similar enough that when I just sorted them without, trying to set up the game and everything, I punch and prep my games, etc. I couldn't tell the difference between them. But there's two very telling things. First of all, that would be solved if major powers had a word underneath that expressed which nation they were. Since each player controls 2 major powers, that means there's 8 major power color sets in the game. It wouldn't hurt to put it there. There's certainly room for it, and I don't see any real reason for it not to. But the much bigger problem was with many of the cav units. In fact, everyone's except the, I think the North Africans, who have camels instead. A little weird there. Tell that to the Numidians. But anyway, I'm sure some camel cav was used, but I'm also pretty sure it wasn't effective in the same way as horsey cav is used. But anyway, so most of the cav in the game was difficult to discern from the infantry in terms of the imagery on it. And I also found myself making change very often, which was kind of a painful process. That has to do with the fact that for infantry units, they have the militia version, which has the same strength on the other side. It's just a, you know, a developmental decision that, whatever, you know. I don't know if there would have been a better solution, to tell you the truth, so I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get everything in here without taking out this stupid insert. It's going to be tight. Play aids, you got lots of them, and they aren't sufficient. And they're overblown, the two together. First of all, diplomacy is handled on two charts, this one and this one down here, which caused me a little bit of grief in terms of not marking someone at war at one point that they were supposed to. But these are fine otherwise. Each player has their own player aid, which gives all their victory point sources and how they draw cards. How they draw cards, not sufficient for the two countries with the most complicated card draw procedures. Well, two players, which is the French and the Spanish. So half the players don't have all their rules on their player aid. Again, that's a matter of the rules being too heavy and too specialized and too funky, and they're not really dealt with here either. There would have been room to put those extra rules if they got rid of the little flags or something else. I don't know, but certainly the graphic choices were such that that was a bit of a problem. The sequence of play, you'll see I have one marked here. It doesn't have rules references everywhere. Somewhat problematic. Also, well, we'll get to that in the rules, but all right, we'll get to it now. The rules reference numbers aren't really sufficient to get you to exactly what you need. Sometimes a number like 18.5 or something like that will get you to like 2 pages of rules. That's not exactly helpful. I know GMT doesn't like to put a lot of paragraph numbers in, but they could put quite a few more and be a lot more helpful. I'm not talking about getting even to the SPI level, which I like. Certainly don't go to the Yaquinto level, but they could certainly have a lot more numbering in it, and we'll get to that when we see it. Each player has their own player aid card, which is much larger than the Here I Stand ones, and in some cases it really kind of needs to be. Included in that is the costs for all the activities they can do, including a little purple section that includes what's different for each player. France and Spain are the only ones who have anything special there. Otherwise, everybody's got their own stuff there, although there may be some differences baked in as to costs, because sometimes some people pay something a little different. I don't really recall. And then there's 4 of these sets of tables, which give the exploration rules, charts on there. Again, not quite sufficient to be able to handle it, but those I found myself getting used to. And then they have, I just found something cool. So Spain's cards are here. They're extra cards. I didn't see that. France's are not explained there. Theirs are a little complicated. They get a card off Roussillon, but otherwise it's all kind of this mechanism that works kind of normally. I can see why they chose to do the Aragon ones there. Interesting. There's some other reminders and stuff here, like a particular thing from the rules is cut out into here. But don't count on everything you need being on these by any means. Yeah. Scenario book contains a lot more than the scenarios. It contains 7 pages of example of play, which of course I did not read. Might have helped me. I doubt it. Extensive designer's notes, which are limited. So, yeah, they're kind of interesting. So the designer's notes give you what are essentially player's notes, tactics for each player, how they should do things. The different unit types are specified in here, but sort of, kind of. He is being weird. And then a compendium of all the home cards, and actually of many of the other cards. I did not find myself having to look this stuff up. It's not a full list of cards. Maybe some special cases you'd have to look up. Resources which showed up in Virgin Queen. There's a whole lot more of them to deal with, and they're kind of, again, they add to your burden on your turn because you can't hold on to them permanently. You have to use them all in the course of your turn, and kind of matching them up and getting them to work with your cards is a pain in the ass, but the fact that there were more of them may have made it more accessible to me, where I was screwing up more with Virgin Queen using resources, and then in this game, because everybody's got them right from the start even, they became more of a factor. But again, they drive you away from the narrative of what's going on and more towards this trying to figure out how to make your hand, get you the things you want, what points you want to play, and all kind of crap like that. That really gets overly complicated to me. And then, no actual designer's notes. They label it designer's notes, but it's really just like, some player notes, and then some clarifications on or reminders on places and cards. And then they go into the history, doing it on a year-by-year basis, focusing on the cards and whatnot, which I did find very interesting to read, but maybe not that exciting. But still, it's not a period that I know all that much about it. Some people say, hey, this is in your wheelhouse. Yeah, but not at the level of detail. This is very much focused on the Iberian Peninsula and France as something, because France interfered with Spain during this period a great deal. So yeah, you have the Italian wars and stuff, but it's all kind of it's centered on that Iberian side of things, the exploration that they're doing, as well as their entanglements on the continent, and not worrying as much about the broader situation at this time, which EU Pop actually covers, so that's kind of cool, because it goes back actually before this. They have a list of notable battles, but then they have all the dramatic personae of the game. And again, interesting read. You know, you find shit out that you just did not know, and that's very cool. I always like that games fill things out. The credits, you know, I got to give props. A huge list of playtesters, which shows, sort of. I can't imagine this game having gone out for blind testing at any stage and not gotten a big, what the fuck, man, did you throw everything into this type of reaction. It is, again, way more chromy, way more filled with crap. Neat crap, but crap, than certainly than Here I Stand. And you know, from reactions I'm hearing from people who liked Virgin Queen, this is going over the limit for them. For me, by going over that limit, I think they actually helped me, because I started to see it less as sort of that competitive and interactive play type game that that Here I Stand, you know, won a place in my heart with. But then that interactive play becomes a burden as opposed to the kind of system that EU has, which I found much cleaner to play for, you know, something that complex. The rulebook itself, there's not a lot bad about it. The playtesting seems to have worked in terms of that. They really nailed a lot down. Did they get everything? I don't know. You know, I may have found a couple of things, but I don't recall any. And that's pretty damn impressive, because this is 64 pages of rules, often duplicated or you know, restated in different ways without any real contradictions in it. There's nothing really missing. I did have one big problem with the scenario book, which ended up fucking me up for this for the main scenario, which was some of the stuff that gets handed out early in the game is handed out in the card draw phase, but I ended up not paying attention to that because I had gotten all the setups and then went to, you know, the sequence of play and just started playing, right? Well, apparently there's some stuff that's basically already in action. In particular, the war in Burgundy is supposed to start the game in play. It's not a big deal. I got a different alt history out of it, right? Let me think about what I can say about these rules. So, first of all, you've got 2 powers per player, which increases the complexity immediately. You've got 2 different things that have different goals, perhaps, probably, to some extent, and you've got to kind of coordinate your points between them. And to some degree, you're limited. You can't play the same points for, you know, for one power as for the other. Military units. They've made the military system more complicated, adding cav charges, siege artillery, stuff like that. Instead of mercenaries, now you have noble militia, basically the noble levies, which worked similarly, I guess. But you've got enough complexity that it's kind of a pain in the ass. That's going to get to be a problem when we get to the combat. The addition of resources, again, adds to the complexity of things. The deck itself, like I said, it's quite large and very random. I think you can expect a lot more randomness than you can out of Here I Stand. I don't remember Virgin Queen well enough to say where it sat on that field, but I've played enough Here I Stand to be able to say, wow, you really can't predict what the hell is going to show up in this. There is some scripting. There's events that have to happen at a certain time. They get pulled out of the deck before you reshuffle or whatever and played at the end of a turn to force certain things to happen, deaths whatever, certain very key events for the period. But I don't think it's terrible. You certainly don't want popes to live much longer than they should have or whatever, and so that's kind of handled through that. There would be other ways to deal. It was possible for a pope to last for a while, whatever. But likewise, cards get added to the deck as time goes on. It's not really scripting, but it does pile the deck up and gets bigger and bigger because not a lot's getting removed from the deck. And those decks are getting very large, and you have no reason to believe, like, an event that you may be preparing for and expecting and everything just may not happen unless it's pre-programmed and forced. Diplomacy. There's some room for diplomacy in this between the players. I feel like most of the diplomatic functionality you're really not going to be trading things away very easily. You don't have a lot of control, so you can give somebody like a draw from your hand. You can't give them a specific card they really want. You can promise to play a specific card that they really want, and that might be more valuable in exchange for other considerations. I had, I think, one diplomatic agreement in it. I gotta say, Here I Stand doesn't tend to have a hell of a lot of diplomacy in it either. Usually it's along the lines of, that guy's gonna win. Let's work together to stop him. And again, that was not clear to me while playing. Now, it is my first play, and maybe it would become clearer. But since I couldn't keep track of the victory points correctly, I don't know. The actions, pretty much like Virgin Queen. If you haven't played Virgin Queen, I guess one of the big key things is if you have these resources, when you play a card, you can increase the amount of points that you have off that card play by dropping a single resource. Now the resources can include other things too, like a card draw, troops, victory points. So they're a good thing to collect, but most of them are command points that you can add to a card. But you can only use one chit with each card you have, each time you play a card. And the points you get off the chit don't really correspond. Like, you can't do the same stuff that you did off the card without paying a premium for it, which means you really have to work to balance out what points you need. You can't just say, oh, I need 8 points this turn. You got to figure out the ordering and everything all before you actually start playing anything down. So it can be a real pain in the ass to kind of figure that out. There's a new kind of space in the game, which is these strategic spaces, which are worth a victory point each. Now, they're problematic, actually. They're one of the things on the board that I find problematic. Most of the victory points on the game are either counters you put on your player card, or that you remove from your player card, but you can count up the points based on them, or, well, yeah, that's it. Everything is visible on the player card, with one exception: the number of these strategic spaces you have. There's nothing to represent them on the card, and they're actually kind of hard to find as you're playing. People made suggestions to put markers, cubes down or something, but the board is busy enough. I don't need that. On the other hand, like if you had a track to keep track of them, I don't know that track would stay effective anyway. There's a lot of places already where you're moving too many pieces. There's too many moving pieces at the same time. The diplomacy table is one of them, where you have to keep track of stuff on one table as well as on the other table, and you're moving stuff on both of them. And you just, for me, it's very easy to forget what I'm, to do one part of that, and I end up kind of in a illegal positioning, as it were. All right, I've got to take a break. I'll keep going through the rules, but the battery's almost dead. My pipe is dead, and I'm going to have to do a merge on this anyway. Control of areas is pretty much the same as in the Here I Stand system. You pay one of your action points to get control of an area. You can do it at a distance, but whatever. Movement, you pay points off your card to move your units. But, so unlike some CDGs, the Here I Stand system kind of uses you have so many points, you can use them kind of wherever. But that gets kind of tricky because it's not quite wherever because of the dual country, dual powers under one player, and because of the way the resources inhibit your ability to do the same things that you use your card for. Battle. Okay. There's multiple types of battle. Field battles, sieges, and naval battles. And in each case, there are slightly different rules with the different number of units and all kind of stuff like that. One, with how many dice you get. So actually just counting the dice meant I had to flip into the rule book quite a few times. That would have been useful on the player aid, I think. Although, again, there's a lot of stuff on the player aids already. More than I could pay attention to. But I think if I became more, if I played it more times, I would still want that because I found myself not really remembering how many dice I got in each given situation. So like in sieges, the attacker maybe gets half as many dice as you think he should, depending on whether or not there's defending forces. But on top of that, sometimes you hit on 4s. Normally you hit on 5s and 6s in the system, but sometimes you hit on 4s. And that's determined by the quality of your troops, and basically you're allowed a certain number of 4 hits, and it's different for each battle type. So there was a lot of rules look up and overhead there. I found myself constantly looking things up, right? Even in the core rules. So like construction, where am I allowed to build? Is it only in keys? Is it only in home territory? What's up here? Where I'd have to look that up. Winter had some interesting little pieces to it. Construction had a really weird thing in it where you could build ships and send them to the exploration map. And you'll get those ships back at full strength during the winter phase. But they're cheaper to build over on the exploration map. And I don't know what the fuck that's supposed to represent, but it's really weird. But you also have specific ships to do exploration with. You can't do it with your normal navies. Your normal navies being out there, they can help by escorting resources that you're getting from the rest of the world in. But the biggest thing in this rule book is that a third of it is devoted only to special rules. Rules for the major powers, rules for the minor powers, basically, and the independents. On top of that, a significant part of the rest of the rule book is these special little cases and everything inserted in places. Some of it's repetitive, some of it's not. And this is where a lot of the burden comes from, is these chromey type rules that are baked into the main rule book, some of which refer to specific events that come from the cards, some of which, you're just like, they're special national capabilities and whatever, and they're often duplicated. But I would say about half of this rule book is special rules of some sort or another. And that's way too much for a game of this nature. And that's really what my takeaway is. And I said it before, it's that the basic design decision to make something like Here I Stand, which is a highly competitive, fairly complex CDG, but is at about my limit of what I can handle the burden of the CDG style play, along with, special rules and all that, and different mechanisms that are being used. I felt like that was at about my limit, which is why Virgin Queen kind of fell flat for me. Well, more than fell flat, I just felt buffeted by it. And every game since Here I Stand that's been built off the system that I've seen, and I know of at least 3 others, one of which is not involving Ed Beach. And I think there's a 4th one, to tell you the truth, but I can't remember what it is. Again, that would not be directly involving Ed Beach. It's not a GMT game. But I seem to remember a 4th one that worked off the system. That I played not long ago. The Time of Wars is definitely one of them, and I'm just kind of like, was this other one? I don't know. Anyway, have upped the complexity to the point where it no longer feels like Here I Stand. Here I Stand was sort of a magic sweet spot for me, and I could understand some people probably thought it was too complicated. On the other hand, some people think Virgin Queen is perfect, perfectly playable, etc. I just feel like that sort of place where I can get into a very competitive and interactive game is blown away by the mechanism, those mechanisms that supported the competitive and interactive play for Here I Stand are just overburdened with the amount of chrome and the amount of special stuff that's going on and everything. The stuff you got to keep in head. There's already a cost to playing a CDG for me. And not just solo. Because you've got to pay attention to everything that can happen and all kind of shit like that. And that interactive style of play ends up taking away greatly from my ability to see the narrative, to craft a good strategy, stuff like that. And for me, Here I Stand hit about where that limit is. And I really enjoyed it at that place. For other people, maybe Virgin Queen is that. There are some that this is okay. What I can say is, if you got really addicted to this game, if you really wanted to play it heavily, you could definitely play it at the kind of competitive level of play that I would expect Here I Stand to generate, right? Where you have a real good grasp, where you're not having to look up rules all the time. Although I still think you're going to have to look up rules fairly often. I'm not sure, but, for someone like me who had to, basically play with my SFB manual in my lap and be flipping through stuff, trying to look stuff up, yes, that's a much bigger thing, but I kind of feel like that's how I would be playing this if I was playing it competitively. I would know probably, at least what the common battle conditions are, etc., and the dice that I'd need for that. I probably would get used to that. But yeah, I mean, you would really kind of have to play this fairly regularly to be in that position where you can say, okay, yeah, I can just play this, And I feel like that's something, for me, the same probably is true with Virgin Queen. I don't know. I kind of want to revisit it because of that, in order to see, hey, is it kind of like this, except maybe a little lighter or whatever? But this is just way outside that sweet spot, and I think it's way outside for most people. Looking at reactions online and stuff, people are not happy with how much is in it. Personally, my own reaction to it, because perhaps of my mindset and how I decided to play it, is slightly higher than I remember it being for Virgin Queen. Virgin Queen was such a disappointment because I looked at it and I'm like, this isn't Here I Stand anymore. This is like carrying too much weight. And again, Here I Stand was about at that limit for me. It's funny because what this game does is two things that I really like, right? The design features and that competitive nature and everything. There's something I like about that did attract me to CDGs early on. Be it, Little Twilight Struggle or Sword of Rome. I'm only sticking to the ones I really, really kind of got a kick out of. Or Here I Stand, and there are others that I got a real kick out of. Don't think that that's the limit of them. Hey, I really. So like Amateurs at Arms, I don't feel had that competitive nature because it was too random. But I really liked the play of it. Cards are a great way to deliver events if the events are simple enough. But if they no longer fit on the cards, if many of the events require that they be referenced by a special rule or something, I think you're going too far with the CDG mechanism. So that's part of it. And that's the thing. The two things that I liked were this kind of innovative, interactive play with a very competitive finish and everything that I feel blows away the coin games, for example. I think Here I Stand does better than the coin games do in terms of giving you that tension to the end of the game with a chance that people can try to force a win early, but it's really, really hard because everybody else can stop you if they're watching. I feel like the other thing that I really like, which is an exceedingly detailed, powerful event structure, right? A la Europa Universalis. I feel like this is aiming way too far in that direction for the other thing that I like. The two are just basically in conflict, and you can't push it to this level in general. Now, again, some people might be fine with that. And to some extent, I'm okay with it as long as I'm not trying to play it really competitively. Until I hit the ending and was like, oh, well, wow, I really didn't see that. But I did have more fun with this than I remember from Virgin Queen, even though it may be heavier. From everything I hear online, yeah, it is. And, that was perhaps just a matter of mindset more than anything else. Again, why I'd like to give VQ another shot. Anyway, that's my take on Tanto Monta. With any luck, I won't get another chance to play it again. But, who knows? I might live too long. Cheers.